Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 330, and today's guest is Harman Singh Narula, co-founder and CEO at Canary Technologies. Are these entrepreneurs uniquely qualified to build an industry-leading company? This is one of the many questions that most, if not all, VCs ask themselves when deciding to make an investment into a company. When you look at Harman's background, it is obvious that his founder fit is at a very high scale. As a graduate from Cornell's esteemed hotel school, he built a foundation in an industry that was ripe for disruption, that being the hospitality industry. The guest experience is so mission critical, yet for years and years, hotels relied on old systems and the same old check-in process. Well, not anymore. Canary Technologies is modernizing the hotel tech stack with its end-to-end guest management platform that digitizes everything from post-booking through checkout. The company works with more than 20,000 hoteliers in 80 countries and is venture-backed by insight partners F Prime Capital, YCombinator, Thayer Ventures, Commerce Ventures, and others. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like a conversation about the market for vertical SaaS solutions, Harman's background story, and how he landed at Cornell to study hotel administration, plus how he got his career started, including spending time in the strategy group at Starwood Hotels, his long-standing friendship with his co-founder S.J. Sani, and what led them down the path of starting Canary Technologies, all the details about Canary, from their experience at YCombinator to surviving the pandemic to the latest with the company and its platform, including their use of AI. Outside of their domain experience, the key factors that influence future rounds of capital, and so much more. Okay, quick side note. It's hard to believe that we have over 300 episodes of the VentureFizz podcast. We have built up an amazing catalog of inspirational stories around building companies, and every episode includes lots of great advice to follow as well. So if you haven't checked out our past interviews, go to venturefizz.com/podcast for the complete list. Oh, and one ask, please share the VentureFizz podcast with your friends and colleagues in the industry. I appreciate all of your support. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Harman. Harman, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Keith.
I'm excited to talk to you because, for the record, I've probably said this on my podcast in the past before, but what you're building with Canary, I actually have a fond appreciation for, going way back though. So in my high school years and a couple of years in college, I worked at the Holiday Inn in Manchester, New Hampshire. So I started out as a porter where I was doing luggage and airport runs. Then I started doing banquets, and then I got promoted to front desk, and it was an amazing experience because it taught me so much, like customer interaction. But certainly it's an area that was
I
ripe for
love it.
disruption back then, never mind how it stayed legacy for as long as it did, which I learned about from, preparing for this conversation. So before we get into Canary, I do want to talk to you about the verticalization of SaaS and software. So you look at, companies might be, hey, we're the HubSpot for X, or what Viva's done for life sciences.
Oh,
What's the state of the market? Because you kind of hear some different tones out there from the investor point of view, but what's the opportunity out there for entrepreneurs for building a verticalized solution?
yeah, I mean, obviously we love vertical SaaS. I think there's actually been a lot of focus around vertical SaaS, a lot of interest recently, both from the investor community and I think even founders. I think like historically, there's been a lot of focus around horizontal SaaS, and that was kind of like a lot of the SaaS boom came from there. But I think more recently, vertical SaaS has become, quote unquote, kind of hot, as kind of they've seen some of these fantastic vertical software businesses mature and kind of how they've performed in the public markets, folks like Viva and Procore and Cedar, and there's a bunch of others, as it sounds like But yeah, I think, interestingly, the proliferation of vertical SaaS has actually been driven a bit by the proliferation of horizontal SaaS. And that's actually been a pretty big driver of vertical SaaS. And the reason is a fewfold, but one is that as there's been more horizontal SaaS, businesses then have multiple tools that they're using across the board. There's kind of this swivel chair type issue where now staff are using multiple different UIs and different tools to manage, what are seemingly very similar or kind of complementary workflows. And so that has then led to this idea of hey, there's actually these nuances also in my workflow that perhaps is horizontal SaaS solution does not necessarily meet all the nuances of what I need. And that has then driven this like desire for better vertical SaaS, meaning, like tools that are built specifically from the ground up for specific use cases within a specific vertical. And so I think we'll continue to see entrepreneurs actually and businesses focus more vertically as the demands within these verticals also, increase and rise for folks to have more nuanced technology to meet their very specific workflow. I mean, I think the other part also is just like there's now been time to see some of these, it's not a new thing, but like to see these vertical software businesses mature and how well they've done. Viva is obviously kind of the gold standard for vertical SaaS founders to kind of look at. But now there's a host of them out there, right? The Procores, the Samsaras, et cetera, of the world that, and you've seen that they kind of really mature. The one last thing that I think is really interesting when you think about vertical SaaS versus horizontal SaaS, and don't get me wrong, I think horizontal SaaS businesses are here to stay. I think they're fantastic, the Salesforces of the world and so forth. But the other thing about vertical SaaS that's always interesting to also think about is that there's always like a hard end user, i.e. like an IRL or like an in real life user, right? Like a hotel or a auto mechanic shop or, in the case of Service Titan, they've got, all these trades workers and so forth, right? That are doing things like HVAC and so forth. But like, there's kind of the end user that is more IRL, whereas sometimes with like horizontal SaaS players, it's like they're basically selling to other SaaS companies, like other B2B SaaS businesses. And so it's a little bit of a little circular where it's like, hey, you're just selling to tech, and then there's a slowdown in tech, and all of a sudden it's like there's a slowdown for a lot of folks. But the vertical SaaS players, they're selling to like a hard end market. So I think that's also just like an interesting thing to think about. And I think we'll continue to see more and more vertical SaaS players popping up.
Yeah, no, agreed. And I had a guest on recently that talked about the adoption of SaaS is still at I thought the number would be like, close to complete adoption. It was far from it. There's still a tremendous growth
Oh yeah.
curve for all these industries. So it just makes a world of sense. All right, so let's rewind the clock. So where'd you grow up? What were you like as a child?
Yeah. So I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up in North Jersey. So I was born in the States, but my parents immigrated here from India. So I very much so grew up in an immigrant household and kind of everything that comes along with that. I think what was I like as a child? I think if you were to go and take a poll of, my parents or my aunts and uncles, I think they'd probably tell you that I was a pretty mischievous child. I think that's what I get told a decent amount, that's kind of the description. I think like I was pretty enterprising. I was a pretty driven kid as well. My parents like to say that like I always wanted to be older than I was. I had an older brother, so I think oftentimes younger siblings are that case. But yeah, I think I was pretty driven. I was pretty enterprising. I was trying to do this or that. I wanted to work really young. I wanted to like try this or that. So that was kind of what I'd say people would say I was like as a kid.
All right, so what brought you to Cornell and what did you study there?
Yeah, so I went to the hotel school up at Cornell, and it was a little bit of serendipity in terms of like how I actually ended up at Cornell. So I was accepted into this like leadership program when I was in high school, and they placed students at different universities. And so I spent a summer actually up at Cornell. I was placed at Cornell, so I spent a summer up there. And let me tell you, it's for folks that have been up in Ithaca. I don't know if you've been up there, but
I have. It's
it's
beautiful.
tough to beat a summer in Ithaca. It's super beautiful, and Cornell has this great campus. And I kind of fell in love with the campus up there. I fell in love with the concept of going to a campus school. And so when I was up there, I really liked Cornell. And towards the end of that program, each of the colleges within Cornell kind of come and they talk about, there's like 7 or 10 different colleges at Cornell, and they kind of talk about the hotel school and the YAC school and so forth. And so the hotel school kind of came in and they pitched it as, hey, we're an undergraduate business degree, business school, but we have, one vertical that kind of all the professors tie back the fundamentals to. And so that was really interesting to me. And it's a little bit of kind of like a jewel at Cornell. So they have a ton of resources and so forth that go to the hotel school. And so I applied. I ended up in the hotel school. Loved the experience there. Loved being up at Cornell, and that was kind of how my journey started in hospitality.
As well as an entrepreneurial pursuit. So the shirt guys.
Yeah. So the Short Guys is one of the early companies I started. So I tried to start companies in high school, smaller scale things. Even when I was younger than that, I tried to do some other stuff in our neighborhood and stuff. But at college, I started this thing called the Shirt Guys. It was basically a full service custom printed apparel company. And so we were printing things for student clubs and fraternity stories, the university itself. Because basically we were printing swag, and we had relationships. We established relationships with distributors of garments and goods, and the relationships with printers. And we put them together, and then we deliver these products to folks. It was pretty cool. I learned a lot from it. It was kind of my first real building of a business, I think, and it was a pretty cool experience.
Oh, I mean, every college needs it, so it's good that you're providing that. So, what did you do after school? How'd you get your career started?
Yeah, so I went down the kind of finance route. I think finance was kind of in its heyday to some degree, but it was also the recession, so it wasn't necessarily the best time. But I think fundamentally the way I looked at it was just that, like, and I still kind of the advice that I end up giving to folks coming out of school and so forth is like, things like finance and consulting, kind of professional services, is just a really good foundational breeding ground for folks and kind of like learning the fundamentals. And I think the other piece for me was that, like, you're just surrounded, and I was looking for a place to be just like surrounded by smart and hardworking folks, right? And so, like, as I'm kind of learning what it means to kind of be in the professional workforce and so forth. So it was tough because it was, I graduated as kind of the recession was really taking place. I ended up at Citigroup, which looking back was it was a front row seat to kind of the turmoil in the financial markets. It was a pretty interesting time to be there. But again, kind of the fundamentals around like skill building and just learning what that looks like and being in that setting was really good. I was still, I think the enterprising nature, like I had this itch to be an entrepreneur still. So I was constantly looking and trying to pitching my friends on like, oh, we could go and do this, and maybe we go and look at some franchises and so forth. But yeah, so I ended up at Citigroup right out of school, which was a really good experience. Enjoyed it and kind of learned a lot of the fundamentals that I think were important coming out of school.
All right, but then what'd you do next? Because Starwood is where you actually probably applied a lot more of what your education entailed.
Yeah, so a couple of years in to analyst program at Citigroup again, I was like, I wasn't sure that necessarily it's what I wanted to do longer term. And, I was just chatting with friends and folks that were a couple of years ahead of me up at Cornell and in the hotel school. And when I surfaced this opportunity at Starwood, and for folks not, it sounds like you're pretty familiar with Starwood. Folks not familiar, it's now part of Marriott, but they used to be, one of the largest hotel companies in the world. And at the time, they were considered, one of the most innovative hospitality companies out there. They had built these brands. They were one of the first to launch like what's now considered kind of like a lifestyle brand, which is W, which was super hot at the time. And so, they had one of the best loyalty programs in the world, SPG, which is,
Honestly, I'm still a member. It's
yeah,
been phenomenal since day one, where I'm like, this, like the American Express card is just
yeah,
such an
yeah.
amazing
Yeah, so there was
program.
tons of loyalty across SPG, and so Starwood it had this aura, and I was obviously familiar with it from the hotel school, and at the time it was being run by this ex-McKinsey guy who had brought in a bunch of strong leaders into the organization and so forth. So I had some conversations with folks at Starwood. It was a company I had admired. I thought it would be a pretty cool experience. Early 20s and so forth. And so I ended up taking a role there on the strategy side, focusing across different parts of the business. Spent some time focused on kind of the sales strategy at Starwood as well. And so that was a really cool experience for me. Traveling, where we basically had clusters of hotels in major cities. And it was predominantly tier 1, tier 2 cities where Starwood had properties across all the brands across the globe. And so I got some really good experience, developed some really good mentors. And, that was one of the things that stuck out to me when I had some conversations there. Initially, it was just, there was a strong density of talent there, I think. They had done a good job of bringing in some really strong folks, strong leaders. And that was really cool experience for me, and just try to, have a different kind of a look at what it was in the industry itself in hospitality, but also just across kind of, problem solving and so forth, more strategic initiatives.
I mean, from a selfish consumer point of view, when they merged with Marriott, it was like, what? This is amazing. Because it was always like, okay, we were Starwood. We'd have friends that were Marriott loyalty rewards. And they'll be like, when they merged the two, it was like, oh, this is like heaven. Like with the
Yeah,
low as
yeah,
an
I think
oyster.
from a loyalty standpoint, for people that travel, I think absolutely. I think for all the folks that were like at Starwood pre-Marriott, I feel like there was a little bit of like, because there was I want to say there was like a pretty good, there's strong culture there. There was like this like innovative, kind of young, ambitious type culture. The company was growing quick. They had these like really fantastic brands, and I feel like folks were like, oh no, like kind of the mothership. But I think from a
Yeah.
consumer standpoint, like absolutely, the combination of the loyalty programs was obviously phenomenal.
All right. So what brought you to B school to Wharton?
Yeah, so that was interesting. I think for me, I had been at Starwood for a while, and at some point, I think I started to feel the rate of learning there was starting to slow down a little bit. Obviously, I was continuing to learn. I really enjoyed some of the folks that I was working with and so forth. But I think like the steepness of the curve at which I was learning, I started to feel kind of like start to flatten. Like it was just, it wasn't as quick. And so as I was thinking about like, hey, what do I want to do long term? I knew I wanted to kind of run something, be an entrepreneur and so forth. But I wasn't quite sure what that was going to look like yet, what shape that was going to take. And so, the framework I was using there, it's kind of two things I was thinking a lot about was like, hey, I want something or an avenue that gives me the opportunity to just be exposed to a lot of things. And then something that like provides me a lot of optionality, right? Because I'm not quite sure what exact direction I want to go in with this. I really enjoy this industry. I really love hospitality. And so perhaps I stay in it, perhaps I try something else. And so business school was just like, it was a great option for that to kind of get to explore, put me in front of a lot of different options, kind of opportunities, and then kind of explore like what passions I was, really into and what kind of direction I wanted to go. And so I ended up going to business school down in Philadelphia, where you are at Wharton, and turned out to just be kind of a phenomenal experience for me in terms of trying to figure out kind of what direction I wanted to go in and so forth.
All right. So after B school, you were at Bain. How did Canary get started?
Yeah, so I was at Bain and kind of had made the decision to go there, kind of similarly to how I had thought about coming out of undergrad, environment, trying to surround yourself with really smart, hardworking folks and lots of exposure to different industries and so forth. I was in the Bay Area at that point. I was out here in San Francisco, and one of my really good buddies, childhood friend, one of my best friends growing up, SJ, who's now my co-founder, he was out here as well. And his and my relationship is the type where we grew up together. We like to joke that our parents were actually friends when we were super young, and so we were actually kind of like forced into friendship initially, and then we chose to stay friends through our lives. So we both grew up in North Jersey in the same kind of sick community. And so he was out here, and he's the type of friend where I think a lot of folks have that friend that you call when you're thinking about an idea or you have some random entrepreneurial thing. And it's like, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And him and I were kind of that type of person for one another. And we're constantly chatting. And right before Canary, actually, he had been working at a part of another hotel technology company. And so he had gone deep into hotel technology as well, an industry that I knew very well. And so both from hotel school, Starwood and Bain, I had done some work in hospitality. And so we were talking a lot about hospitality, hotel technology, and had that entrepreneurial kind of itch and bent. And that was kind of the origins of Canary. We said, hey, we could do this. And we trusted each other very deeply, and it was something that we decided to kind of start together. And we saw this large opportunity in the industry, and that's kind of how Canary was born.
Well, from what I learned, and I was kind of joking about this when we first started talking about the Holiday Inn, but the technology is 20 plus year old legacy stack for most hoteliers. And then they're always dealing with labor issues, whether it's a shortage or wage costs. So those must have been industry trends that you were like, wait, there's a massive ripe for disruption opportunity here.
Yeah, so I think that those are absolutely right, Keith. I think those are definitely things that also now have kind of popped up. And this idea of like, it's older enterprise software, that was certainly something that popped up. But there was these additional pieces for us that we thought a lot about, even in the earliest days of our business, was that we just saw that we believed that technology and hospitality, the tech stack in hospitality was going to change pretty significantly also over the next decade or so. And there was a few reasons that were driving that. I think, like from an industry standpoint, if you kind of rewind, hospitality is one of the oldest industries in the world. You kind of rewind to travel, call it, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, if you traveled, hotels were pretty much kind of like the only game in town. Like you stayed in a hotel, right? That was kind of predominantly where folks stayed. That was as a lodging product, that was kind of predominant. There were some other options, but it was predominantly hotels. And obviously over the last decade or so, that's changed very drastically, right? And so, short-term rentals is truly, another elephant in the room, and just as large, if not larger. And by the way, these short-term rentals, they were kind of like born in the age of technology, right? So obviously they existed before, but like they really came to light and became this like true competing lodging product over the last decade. Like Airbnb is kind of the poster child for this, was born in the age of technology, right? And so that was now a new competing force for hotels. And we saw that was going to be competition. Competition's great, right? Because it drives folks to innovate and iterate. And I remember when I was at Starwood, way back when, I would talk to GMs in the field and I'd say, hey, what do you think about this Airbnb or short-term rental thing popping up? And a lot of the GMs would be like, nah,
Never.
not a big deal. And I remember thinking like, I don't know, it feels like a pretty good value proposition for the consumer. And like, I feel like, and we saw it, it was right, it was growing pretty quickly. And so now fast forward, now if you talk to a GM of a hotel and you talk to them, they view it as a part of their comp set, their competitive set, and they kind of track that now. And so that was one big thing that I think was coming. And then simultaneously, the traveler has changed very drastically as well, right? And so like rewind 20, 30, 40, 50 years, travelers were very different, right? Now, folks like ourselves are the predominant traveler and we demand technology, right? Because like we were also, we were brought up in the age of technology. We're very comfortable utilizing technology. And so the demands coming from the traveler, because the traveler had changed, were also shifting. And so like these types of forces, as me and SJ were kind of thinking about our business, and then compounded with, the industry's hotel tech stack was very old, or, it had been built a very long time ago. And so we thought there was a lot of gaps there. And so that was kind of some of the overarching thesis around, hey, there's going to be a big opportunity here around technology and hospitality. And I always go around and I tell people like, Canary's thesis is very simple. Technology in hotels is not great, and it needs to evolve and kind of treat and service the modern traveler and the modern staff. And so that's kind of like the biggest drivers of how we ended up kind of working in hospitality tech.
So what was your first product? Like there's obviously a lot of things you could tackle first. So what did you decide was like the key area to focus on initially for some customer attraction?
Yeah, so this was something that SJ and I were very conscious about, was that, it's very difficult to go in and say, hey, everyone wants to launch a platform, everyone wants to have a mission critical platform in the market and so forth. But it's really tough to go in to what would, a vertical, a little bit slower moving vertical when it comes to technology, like a hospitality, and say, hey, here's a brand new platform, or I'm going to replace this platform, and so forth. And so we said, hey, what we want to do is, in some of the best vertical software businesses, we didn't invent this playbook. It was basically like, let's go find some specific gaps that hotels have, and let's solve those. And so one of the first solutions we launched was our digital authorization solution, which what it does is it helps with basically what you consider non-standard bookings at hotels, right? So, outside of you're going on an OTA, like an online, hotels.com or something like that, outside you're going on an OTA to book a room, or maybe you're loyal and you're going direct and you're booking on Westin.com or Bonvoy or something like that. Outside of that, you kind of think of other bookings as more non-standard, right? So let's say you're hosting an event at a hotel, you need X number of room nights for your event. Excuse me, you also maybe need some F&B and so forth. And so you're going to have more direct one-off conversation with the hotel about that type of booking. And when you do that, a lot of times the forms of payment are on these pieces of paper that folks will use. They're called credit card authorization forms. And you may have done this before. A hotel will send it out, and you'll kind of print it out, fill it in. It's a PDF sometimes. You'll send it back. And when we
So
first
not
started
secure.
the business, yeah, when we first started the business, I think it was some crazy number like 30 or 40% of hotels were still asking people to fax these back. So it's like fax this back to the hotel, then they kind of print it out, they hole punch it, they put it in a binder. That's kind of the standard process at hotels. And we said, hey, that's a problem. Guests don't like that, staff don't like that. It's not really secure. Like, we can solve that. So that was the first solution that we started on. And we started to grow on that very quickly because we had definitely hit on a need that hotels had. And it was kind of off to the races with that first solution.
All right, so talk about growing, right? So scaling, building more, additional features, and recognizing, like, spending time with your customer, hearing their pain points, and then expanding into other solution sets.
Yeah, so I think this is one of the beautiful parts of vertical SaaS also, right? Because you're so focused, you get to your customer really well. I think that was really important. Also, like, we both me and Ashley, we had domain expertise to some degree. I like to say I think I'm a pretty big student of hotel technology, having the hotel school at Starwood. I looked at a bunch of stuff there, and at Bain spent a bunch of time also looking at things. So, like, when you're just focused on that one vertical, you get to spend a lot of time understanding all the different nuances of, like, where's the gaps in the stack. And we talk to our customers a lot, and we also had this kind of like thesis around, alluding to kind of some of the big earlier macro trends, was that technology in hotels was also going to become a lot more guest facing. And so, like, the traveler was demanding that, the hotels wanted to meet that. And it was actually going to be really beneficial for the staff on property to drive a lot of, streamlining so that they could focus on, the hospitality of what it means to, for somebody to be staying at a hotel, as opposed to kind of the administration that also goes along with that. And by that, what I mean is, things like a mobile check-in, allowing for the guest to provide all the information, like a registration card and identification and payment information, et cetera, before they arrive, rather than having to stand at a front desk as the front desk agent kind of like types that all in and so forth. And so we had this thesis that guest-facing technologies were going to become bigger and bigger in hospitality. And COVID actually was, pretty big, it was pretty big driver of that, as well, as people were thinking about things contactlessly and technology. We saw this in a lot of verticals, I think, if you look at, but in hospitality especially, we saw just hoteliers' mindset towards technology really shifted, and they were much more intrigued by it and wanted to invest significantly more into it. And so that's when we kind of launched what we consider the guest management system, which is basically every digital touch point that the hotel is going to have with the guest, right? And so that's a mobile check-in, a mobile checkout, guest messaging, upselling, digital tipping is really big in North America right now, and e-registration, and there's a bunch of host of other things, but it's basically any touch point that the hotel is going to have with the guest pre-stay, during stay, and post-stay. And so that's when we started to kind of build out what that platform and that suite was going to look like as well.
Got it. Okay. To rewind the clock a little bit, so you were part of Y-Combinator. So talk about that experience and what you learned from being part of that program.
Yeah. So I mean, only good things to say about YC, right? Obviously, it's this storied program in Silicon Valley. It had a lot of positive impact on both SJ and myself personally, I think, as entrepreneurs, and then obviously the business overall as well. And I think one of the things that like YC does that's just like phenomenal is just that, like, they put you in a room with like-minded, highly ambitious individuals. And I think one of the key traits of being an entrepreneur is just like being optimistic. Entrepreneurs tend to be very optimistic individuals, right? They have a lot of hope and vision for the future, and they're optimistic. And so if you kind of just imagine that, right? Like, you're getting placed in a room with other folks that are highly ambitious. They're likely very optimistic. They're on the earlier end of their, like business building journey, and they have a passion for what they're working on, and everyone's kind of in it together, and you're having the opportunity. And then you layer on top of that, them bringing in, these successful entrepreneurs who were in our shoes just 5, 7, 10 years earlier. And it's a recipe for just like a really good environment, to be frank. And so it really helps drive that community of founders, and kind of optimism, I think, really helps drive businesses forward. And, till this day, we're still close with a host of the folks that were in our batch. And that starts to whittle down over time, of course, right? Because, building a business, it's kind of funnel and it's a numbers game. But yeah, it was a really cool experience for us to, build those relationships with other founders, kind of push ourselves really hard for those months or weeks that we were there. And then obviously have that community when we come out of the program as well.
You touched upon the pandemic, and I wanted to dig a little bit deeper on that because when at first was announced that everyone was supposed to go home for 2 weeks, and then obviously the world shut down for an extended period of time, like that must have been a very challenging. It was a challenging time for every industry, but obviously travel just stopped.
Yeah, I mean, like COVID was just, for the world, right? And just
Right.
for generally, for humans as a whole, I think COVID was just such an interesting moment in time, and continuation moment of time. And so hospitality was no different. The industry was obviously impacted extremely greatly. Our business also, lots of uncertainty around what was going to happen. For us, we spent a lot of time in that moment, when COVID kind of first took hold, talking to our customers. We spent a lot of time with our customers and basically saying, hey, what can we do for you? How can we help you? We were in, a good position, I'd say, to be able to, we had a strong team, and we had these products in market, but we also could build things, and we had the opportunity to say, hey, what can we do for you? What do you need that might be able to help? And at that time, we actually launched a couple of things. We didn't, we foregoed payments that some of our customers owed us, and at that point we had thousands of hotel customers, I think. And so we tried to kind of alleviate what we could, and then we built some products actually to help them. And so one of the things at that point was we built this, kind of nuanced gift card solution for hotels that they could drive, cash flow in their local community, for folks that might want to buy pre-buy nights. Maybe they have guests coming into town, or they expect to have guests coming into town in the next 12 months or something like that. They can, pre-buy nights for their local community and support their like local entrepreneurs. Because at the end of the day, most hotel owners are, they're kind of running an SMB, right? It's a hotel owner that's running maybe 100, 200 room property. And so in their local community, people wanted to help. And so we launched this program, this gift card program for hotels, that they could drive that, because, they still have their debt service that they had to pay and so forth. So, we helped drive some cash flow. We launched another solution. We took one of our solutions and actually kind of built around it, because a lot of our large management company customers who have portfolios of hotels, they unfortunately had to go through furloughing some of their staff, just given the state of the market. And but they still wanted to provide the benefits, and they needed to collect payments in certain ways and so forth. And so we built this very, very specific, nuanced kind of tool for them that they could use during COVID as well. And then we continue to basically say, what are the things that you think are going to be critical for you moving forward, and what parts on our roadmap maybe make sense, more sense for you earlier, and then kind of pulled forward some of the solutions that we already had on the roadmap to launch those as well. So that was, obviously tough time for hoteliers, when, I forget, the 25 plus 30% of hoteliers are saying they had to close their doors and so forth. But I think the industry came out of it stronger. I think the mindset around technology came out, I can tell you firsthand, came out much stronger. And obviously since then, with the, revenge travel and kind of the amount people want to spend or allocate out of their budget towards travel, hotels have certainly been the beneficiary of that since then. But yeah, the pandemic was a really interesting time.
All right, let's fast forward. What's the latest, like the size of the company, employees, customers, whatever you can share.
Yeah, We've continued to grow pretty dramatically. We now service tens of thousands of hoteliers in more than 80, or I think the number is like 82 different countries. We're brand mandated by some of the biggest brands, management groups, ownership groups in the world. So a lot of the large North American household hotel brand names, the Wyndhams, the Marriotts, the Hilton Choices, et cetera, of the world. We do a lot of work with them. We have 3 offices now in North America. So we've got an office in San Francisco, Dallas, and New York, as well as some smaller offices outside of North America at this point as well. Recently, we won 8 different hotel tech awards. So in the industry, there's kind of this benchmark. It's called Hotel Tech Report, and they kind of go out and they survey. I think they surveyed 25,000 hoteliers or something like that to vote on the solutions that they use, and kind of in different categories and kind of overall. And it was a cool fact that we were told that we were the most voted vendor in the ecosystem. So across all the solutions and so forth, we just received the most number, which was really cool. We were the #1 guest experience platform for hoteliers, the #1 mobile check-in, digital tipping, etc. So we won a bunch of awards, which was really cool. I think one for me that was pretty important, pretty awesome to see was we were voted one of the best places to work in hotel technology. And I think that's really cool because we've invested really heavily in something I think about a lot. Just a testament to the team that we've built here. I think we spend a lot to try to make sure that we're kind of building an A team and kind of full of players that are highly ambitious, entrepreneurial, and so forth. So that's kind of where the business sits today, and lots on the roadmap moving forward as well, things that we want to touch on, but a lot of momentum and a lot of excitement around what we're doing in the market.
And you had a recent announcement with Wyndham Hotels. So what were the details of that?
Yeah, there was a recent announcement with them. We're deploying our guest management system across their portfolio across the globe. So more than 6,000 hotels, and it's going to be one of the largest deployments of guest-facing AI technology also in hospitality, if not the largest deployment at this point, which is really exciting. And so as that gets kind of underway, I think it'll be good, not only obviously as for them and for their customers and for their staff members, and with Canary, but I think as an industry as a whole, it's also really cool to kind of see the focus and the investment that's being made around guest-facing technologies at this point.
So what's an example of like guest-facing AI?
Yeah, I think there's really simple examples of it. When you're messaging and communicating with a hotel, rather than having to wait for somebody to kind of get you a response, most more than 50% of those requests and messages can actually, AI can actually come back to you on that. If you're looking for recommendations, what are the restaurants in the local area? What time is the pool? Just requests that you're going to have when you're traveling. I think that's like a really straightforward example of it. I think the other piece is also is that AI is able to help folks as they're planning their trips as well, right? Hey, I'm going to, Tuscany for 7 days. I'm staying at this property. And what does it look like? What are options that I might have? And what does an itinerary look like? And there's been a lot of talk about this out there already. I think the other place also that it's going to come to play is not only necessarily helping just the guests, but also helping the staff with specific, right? So you can imagine there's certain tasks that are repetitive that staff members, front desk agents are doing, and so forth in hotels. And by helping them automate those and utilizing AI to make some of those tasks less onerous on the individuals, it frees up the staff member to then deliver better hospitality to the guests, right? So if a check-in is a really good example. If today, on average, a check-in takes anywhere from call it 8 to 12 minutes for a guest when they arrive at a hotel. Once you get up to the front desk, tends to be 80-90% of that time is actually all administrative, where the front desk agent is actually typing in information. They're taking your license and then typing in information. And if we're able to help automate those things and make that more seamless for the staff, then rather than spending, maybe the check-in goes from 8 minutes down to 3 or 4 minutes, but now 3 out of those 4 minutes, the staff is actually talking about the hotel and offering up the different amenities that they have and talking through different things that the guest might be able to do once on property. So those are some AI examples, as well as just things that we're doing on the back end also with staff and utilizing AI there to then free them up to deliver a better guest experience.
Got it. Okay. Now you've raised multiple rounds of venture capital funding, and you'll hear investors often say, I look to invest in companies where the founders are uniquely qualified to solve and deliver on this problem. And I look at you and your co-founder SJ's background, I would say that is a strength, right? So how much do you think your background of knowledge going back to Cornell really helped play into raising capital initially? And what advice would you have for, founders that are looking to raise?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, Keith, right? It's in the earlier days, especially in the early days of raising capital, especially, it's a lot about the founders, right? Because businesses change, they zig and they zag. There's a lot of things that you just have to figure out. And so, sure, the idea matters and what you're working on is important, right? But, I'd say some folks out there probably say it's like 95% in the earliest days, in the seed stages of raising capital is about the founders. And so I think we definitely saw that, a lot of folks, the feedback that we got also. And in vertical markets, I think it certainly helps to have domain expertise and having that background. Both SJ and myself, having known hotel technology, was important in order to be able to talk to the nuances that we saw and what we thought it was going to take to kind of build a business in this vertical. As you progress, I think, it shifts. It continues to be about the founders, but different, right? There's domain is still important, but I think it's also about, do they have the ability to scale themselves? Do they have their ability to build and recruit, retain a really strong team? Do they have the ability to kind of hit the next inflection points and become, company builders, while also kind of driving the traction within the business? And at the same time, it's traction, right? Like, I think, traction is king. If you can bring to the table the progress that the business has made, as well as your vision in terms of how you're going to do that forward, you have the credibility for this is what you expect to happen in the future if you have data behind you to show you the traction that you've already had. And so I think in the earliest stages, yeah, it matters a lot in terms of the founders, if they're suited for, there's product market fit, and then there's founder market fit, founder product fit, etc. But at the end of the day, traction is king, I also think, right? You got to bring traction to the table, and that gets people excited. And so focusing on that and focusing on the customer and building something that people want, as kind of YC says, is kind of the most important things in the earliest days.
We talked about your initial product and then expanding to other offerings in your guest management system. So what advice would you have for founders that, they have that initial product market fit with a specific pain point that they're addressing? At what point do they think broader of, hey, this can be a platform, this can be a much larger solution versus a narrow piece of the pie?
Yeah, so there's a lot out there. This is a really good question, because there's a lot out there on this. Like, how early do you launch the additional products and so forth? And sometimes that's serendipity, to be frank with you, right? Like, you have a lot of pull coming from the market on, hey, you've provided me this, and I'd like to see, this is complementary, this is the next iteration and so forth that we'd like to push, and maybe that was already on your roadmap. But I think, like, it's very nuanced for each business. And so I shy away from sometimes giving kind of the general cookie cutter advice on this. I think, like, each business is very nuanced when it comes to when's the right time to launch your different products. I do think that in vertical markets, it's sooner than for other types of businesses. So, like, B2B vertical software businesses tend to have to expand their surface area when it comes to product. If that's your goal, right? Like, if your vision is to kind of build this platform and you see that opportunity, they do need to end up expanding their surface area earlier than horizontal businesses. And I think that's also an advantage, because you have kind of that expertise in that vertical. The specific pain point that you're going to solve. But that can also be very challenging, right? Because you're limited on resources, and all of a sudden you have expanded surface area. So you have to think about what the trade-offs are going to be when you're now investing in this new area versus kind of the other area that may have already been going. But if you don't make the investment, at some point you might plateau on that one area. So you have to make sure that you're kind of investing ahead and so forth. So I think it's pretty nuanced for each company. And you gotta have to think about what the trade-offs are gonna be. Vertical markets, I do think it probably happens sooner than for horizontal businesses.
One of the things I think colleges should do more of, and I've been seeing it more often a little bit, is learning how to sell. Like a curriculum of explaining to people what that involves. And like, how important do you think that is as far as being successful as an entrepreneur, like learning how to sell?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that statement 100%. That if that was a part of the curriculum, you know, I think one of the things in the earliest days of Canary that we actually thought about trying to implement was that everyone that joined the business had to go through being an SDR or sales development representative for a certain period of time, right? And it can be short, but they needed to see. And even today, we encourage everyone that joins. We always encourage, hey, shadow. You need to shadow maybe 50, 100 calls. Get on and hear what it's like. And I think being an SDR in a B2B SaaS business is probably the like truest form of what it means to kind of sell and kind of learn, master the art of kind of that cold pitch and so forth. I think selling as an entrepreneur, people use it, and sometimes, being in sales has this negative connotation, I think. But at the end of the day, like every part of your job as an entrepreneur is some form of storytelling or sales, right? You're selling to try to drive traction in customers. You're selling your storytelling to drive fundraising and investors, and getting them excited. So you're storytelling and selling to try to retain, try to hire the best talent and retain the best talent, etc. Partners. And so every aspect that you look at as an entrepreneur, you're quote unquote selling and storytelling and trying to bring people in. And so I think it's absolutely critical for founders to get comfortable with that, right? And sometimes there's founders that are very averse, like, oh, I don't want to be the sales, I don't want to be a sales guy. And at the end of the day, I think it's like it or not, and whether or not you're direct selling to drive new customers, at the end of the day, in some aspect, in all aspects of your business, you're going to be selling or storytelling, which is really important.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, a key part, especially in the earlier days of the business, it's your thought leadership that's going to create the sale. It's the knowledge, the domain experience of the problem set that you're solving and understanding their pain. Because I learned this years and years and years ago from when I was recruiting Sandler, that we had Sandler sales training, and the
Yeah.
thing I took away from that was no pain, no sale. There's no pain. You're not gonna get. They could spend all day talking to you, but they won't actually, cut a check for what you're looking to
Yeah,
deliver.
I think it's just a part of kind of our heritage here at Canary. Also, SJ and I always talk and joke that it's reality. We were the first SDRs, AEs, CSMs, etc. at Canary. We used to make 80, 100 dials a day, calling hotels bottoms up. You learn very quickly, and sometimes we get back into it. And you learn very quickly what resonates, what doesn't resonate, what's important. What triggers additional questions. And so, yeah, I think it's super critical for founders to be very close to that.
All right, what are three apps you can't live without?
Personal or professional? Are we like
I'm gonna say,
work
well, you
productivity
could mix the
tools?
two. I mean, it's up to you. Like some people, I guess I like to avoid, Slack, Gmail, my calendar. Like it's just like okay, yeah, we all use those.
Yeah. I think from a productivity standpoint, I think there's a couple. I'd say Gong is really, I think it's a fantastic product. I think provides significant amount of value just in terms of, the ability to hear calls. Similar, you get to hear cold calls, you can hear demos, you can hear partner calls. It's just really valuable, I think, especially for managers and leaders to be able to, when you can't be on every call or shadow every call or hear every call in the office, you can go back and actually listen to them and when something pops up. And so I think Gong is really valuable and kind of pulls out, it does a really good job of pulling out key insights now as well. So that's a product, and I think it's really good. I use I know you mentioned that email. I do use, an inbox tool that I find really useful. It's really popular now, Superhuman, which I think is really great. So I really like that tool as well. I am a big fan, I'd say like more on the personal side, but Google Photos. I think I'm a big user, and uh, we had the opportunity also one of the founders of Google Photos and so forth. Had a chance to meet with him. He's involved with the business early on, and I'm just a big fan of that. I find it really useful. It's great. I've got young kids, and so like the opportunity, it just kind of gives you flashbacks and so forth. So that's really cool. There is a B2B SaaS app actually that I find pretty great. Also more on the personal side, it's called Brightwheel, and it's used by a lot of, I think, like preschools and so forth. And it's a place for them to communicate with parents and send pictures of children and kind of the classroom and so forth. And as I've got two young kids, I use that I use a decent amount. I think that's really great as well. So those are probably the ones that come to mind that I find to be really great products.
Very cool. All right. How about a podcast or book recommendation for entrepreneurs?
Um, I'm a big fan of biographies. So I tend to my books, the books I tend to read tend to be biographies of folks. Um, but if I was going to recommend something to an entrepreneur, B2B SaaS focused, um, there's a book called From Impossible to Inevitable that Jason Lemkin wrote, I believe. Um, I find that book, I early on, read that book, found it to be really useful, just kind of like fundamentals around B2B SaaS. Um, Other books, I really enjoyed the Sam Walton biography, Made in America, the Walmart founder. I like a bunch of Jeff Bezos stuff, so like the frameworks that he uses and stuff. So the Everything Store, I thought that was really good. And then non-business biography related, I'd say Sapiens is a book, super popular, but I found it to be very impactful when I read it and recommended it to a lot of folks as well. So those are probably some book recommendations on my end.
All right. What do you like to do for fun outside of work?
Uh, so kind of as I alluded, I have two young kids. I've got a 2.5-year-old and a 1-year-old. So between them and um, Canary, I'd say that's where most of my time goes. I
Yeah.
do like to try to block out time, try to spend time with, my wife and my children. I have recently, or someone recently tried to get into biking a little bit more, and my son is old enough now to be able to sit on the seat on the back of my bike. And so out here
Nice.
in the Bay Area, these beautiful rides that you can do. So I've been doing that a good chunk, and it's pretty fascinating to just like hear or see the world from his perspective and the things that kind of stick out to him and that he gets excited about. So that's kind of a recent hobby that I've been trying to take up.
That's so cool. Well, Harman, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through your background story. Obviously, all the great work you and the team are doing at Canary, and obviously all the great advice.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Keith. It was a great discussion.